October the 5th, 1994, 5 people were found dead in this house in Canada. 10 hours later in Switzerland, 25 bodies were discovered in a chalet in the small town of Salvan, and 23 more in a nearby village. In less than 24 hours, 53 people had died. Their remains set alight by identical incendiary devices. Among the dead, 8 children, several senior civil servants, and 2 millionaires. But they had something else in common. All were members of a secretive sect, the Order of the Solar Temple. The day before the deaths, on the 4th of October 1994, Thierry Huguenin was told to drive to a chalet in the Swiss Alps and pick up an envelope of cash. After 14 years, he had left the order and was still owed money by one of its leaders, Joe de Mambro.
He told me, Thierry, come up. I have the money for you.
When he got there, something was strange. The chalet was locked and the shutters closed.
I felt bad, and something inside me said, go, go, go.
De Mambro met him outside and claimed he couldn't find his key. He called a locksmith to break in.
When the locksmith opened the door, I reeled back 3 meters because of the smell of petrol fumes. And then I went up the path very quickly. And his friend caught up with me and she tried to get me to come back, but I drove away.
Having escaped, Thierry left without his money and drove the 100 miles back to Geneva. At midnight, he heard of the deaths in Canada. By morning, images of the burnt Swiss chalets flashed around the world. The chalet, which Thierry had visited, contained 25 bodies, including those of the order's leaders, Luc Jouret and Joseph de Mambro.
He always said to us that when he would die, his body would be consumed by flames like that. It was amazing what happened in fact. His body didn't burn in the fire at all. That's why it was recognized. It's extraordinary when you think he always used to say fire was his element and fire would reclaim him.
At the other chalet in Chieri, fire didn't completely destroy the building. Police were able to reconstruct where the victims had died. 21 members were found shot in this garage, which had been converted into a chapel. Some had plastic bags over their heads. In Salvan, 1 person was found shot. The rest had been poisoned and suffocated. With so many dead, in so many different ways, it was one of the most baffling cases the Swiss police had ever faced. 2 years later, just what happened and why is still a mystery. As part of their investigation, the Swiss police recruited a cult expert from Swiss military intelligence, Jean-François Mayer.
The hypothesis which we had at the beginning was that most likely, given the magnitude of the event, there should be some survivors involved in the actions. And we began really with that in mind. There must be some people who knew a lot, and we are going to find out about those people. We are going to locate those people. We are going to locate those people who maybe made some profit of the tragedy and so on.
The order was mystical and elitist. They claimed to be the heirs of the medieval Knights Templar, Christian warriors who guarded the Holy Grail. They also believed in reincarnation. Obsessed with secrecy, they blurred their faces in this video they made. It shows the start of an initiation ceremony. The order attracted many successful upper-middle-class people, disillusioned with conventional churches, yet hungry for spiritual experiences. At its height, it boasted over 1,000 members in Canada, France, and Switzerland. One of the leaders, Joe de Mambro, was a businessman. The other, Luc Jure, a doctor. At first, the police had little to go on, but then 4 bizarre letters turned up. Sent to the Swiss and French media, they claimed members had left the Earth on a so-called transit to the star Sirius. Copies were also sent to Jean-Francois Meyer.
The letters, the testaments, seemed to confirm the hypothesis of a suicide. And don't forget that on the first evening, the public declarations by the investigators were going rather into the direction that it might have most likely been a suicide.
2 days later, a 5th letter appeared. Unsigned like the others, it was addressed sarcastically to "Our very dear Charlie." This was Charles Pasqua, the then French Minister of the Interior. Although his office denied all knowledge of this letter, a draft of it was found on one of the computers in the wreckage at Salvan. It complained bitterly that, "Everywhere we worked, the police and other authorities intimidated and threatened us, keeping us under constant surveillance. Police intimidation increased, and the harassment went beyond what could be endured." The mystery deepened when rumors started that the cult's leader, Luc Jure, had not been killed, and his badly burned body had been wrongly identified. These rumors were so persistent that the chief pathologist was forced to re-examine the evidence.
We had made an identification first on the basis of dental records, and we were sure. And so we stopped our investigations. But then, for reasons I would call political, precisely in order to be able to answer questions, we decided to do a second identification on the basis of DNA testing. We suggested that to the judge, and he agreed. And that test led to precisely the result we expected, an identification of 99.99% certainty.
With Jure proved dead, the Swiss authorities concentrated on collective suicide. But not everyone was so certain. In France, a working detective, Roger Facon, began to voice doubts. The author of a number of books on cults, including one on the order itself, Facon pointed out a series of inconsistencies. The specially adapted gun used in the killings was found outside the chalet in Salvan with no fingerprints. Its owner, Joel Egger, had flown to Geneva from Montreal just before the bodies were found in Canada. A police contact told Facon the gun could only fire 1 bullet at a time. The Swiss police claimed all 65 bullets came from the gun.
65 bullets, all shot from the one gun. If you think of the number of people in the chalet, 25 of them who are running around, and the fact that the gun has to be loaded each time, if you think of the agitation given what's going on, I estimate that it's about 45 seconds to find each bullet, to look, to pause, to load it, to take aim, to fire. You have to allow 45 seconds for each bullet. So it would have taken 60 minutes or so. That's over an hour to fire all the bullets. It's just not possible.
Families of victims were also concerned. Rosemary Jaton lost her brother, her sister-in-law, and 2 nephews at Chiri.
For 18 months, the journalists and the judges have said it was collective suicide. For my part, personally, I always thought that it was more likely to be a murder, because we had no idea our family might be implicated in anything like that. And in July 1995, Mr. Pillar, the investigating magistrate, said that our relatives were killed with 3, 5, 7, and 9 bullets, all of them lethal. Now, you can't kill yourself by putting 9 bullets in your head.
This wasn't the only inconsistency in the investigation. This was the scene at Salvan a year after the deaths. Standard police practice is to seal the scene of a crime and to remove everything for forensic examination. Yet the place was littered with charred remains. Some were poignant. Some were reminders of how many children died. But others could be significant evidence. Had anyone checked the memory of this electronic typewriter? Or sifted through the many files, tapes, and documents still lying around? We had one of the videocassettes examined and found it a surprising contrast to the cult's professed beliefs. It contained a pornographic Canadian movie. But it wasn't just the Swiss who might have slipped up. It was the same story in Canada, where 5 people had died. To the amazement of one researcher, anyone could get access to the ruins.
Il y avait beaucoup de jouets d'enfants. Ça a été assez un choc.
I found toys, papers, manuscripts lying around. There was a lot of debris scattered about. There were also many documents. I was astonished because I thought the police would have taken absolutely everything away for analysis, if only to find the slightest clue, including any psychological clue as to why it had happened and the mindset of the organization.
To relatives like Mrs. Jaton, from the start the investigation seemed flawed.
I phoned as soon as I heard there had been a massacre at Sherry, because I knew my brother went to the organic farm at Sherry.
Daniel Jaton lived here with other members of the order. Although the house might have held vital evidence, police were slow to seal it off.
They only put seals on the place on the 13th of October, so for 8 days anyone could have taken material evidence or tampered with the evidence.
It wasn't the only delay in the investigation. The Swiss police took 10 weeks to contact one of the French treasurers of the order. She had close links with the cult's leaders and is now too frightened to be identified.
The police were very obvious. They were quite determined to demonstrate it was a matter of a guru and a sect. They asked me if there had been special effects, if I'd been asked to sleep with other members. It was a matter of showing it was a sect. I thought their questions were very narrow. If I said things that did not fit the focus of their investigation, the Swiss police didn't write it down. They said, no, we're not interested in that.
When the press questioned the thoroughness of the Swiss investigation, the authorities rejected all criticism.
I want to know, should you be asking me questions or should I be asking you questions? I don't want to avoid the question. I will answer the question. I have told you what the police did on the spot there. You say that the police did not do its work properly. I assure you the police did do its work. An inquiry has to take place at once, immediately after the event. And I have proved it. All the people was seen. All that was useful was taken away.
The police might have been satisfied, but Thierry Huguenin, the ex-cult member, was far from happy. He was sure there was about to be another mass killing. He told the Swiss police, but they did little about his warnings.
We had the feeling at the time that 3 or 4 rather older members who were obviously quite nostalgic might commit suicide, but on an individual basis. I have to be very frank, we doubted very much that a group would commit suicide.
4 months after Thierry's warning, on December the 22nd, 1995, another 16 members of the order were found dead. They were killed in the Vercors, an isolated region of France. All the bodies had been burned and laid out in star formation.
The second set of deaths of Vercors has come, of course, as a shock to all the investigators.
So did their identities. 2 of the dead were French policemen whose car had been seen near the scene of the earlier massacres. They'd even been interrogated at the time. Another victim was equally unexpected, the man who had mailed the 5 so-called suicide letters. After this killing, no letters were received. In trying to unravel why 69 men, women and children died, experts have studied the philosophy of the Order of the Solar Temple. Members built chapels like this one to hold their most private rituals. The cult was obsessed with secrecy, codes and symbols. Novices had to pass a series of initiations before they could attend ceremonies. The first step was to be robed in a cape. One initiate was a Canadian insurance salesman, Herman Delorme.
And you would go through this ritual where you would be given a cross, you would be sworn in as a member, and you would also swear not to reveal any of the going-ons inside this group, because everything was kept extremely secretive. There was always what we'd call a guard at the door to make sure that when the time of the ritual actually it was time to start, nobody would interfere, nobody would come in.
Both leaders, de Mambro and Jure, were skilled manipulators who understood their followers' craving for spiritual secrets. Recruits were often told they were reincarnations of famous religious and historical figures. It was a strategy that attracted many outwardly successful individuals, such as Camille Pilet, a director of Piaget watches.
When Dr. Jure realized the fortune that Pilet represented, he and Joe got together and they brought him into a sanctuary. They told him that he was the reincarnation of Joseph of Arimathea, and the poor man was like this. And he was surrounded by Jure, de Mambro, and the bigwigs of the order. And then they awarded him all the capes in one go. In theory, you had to go through a process of initiation and learning to earn each cape. Each cape had a particular meaning. But he got them all in one go. And he paid all his contributions in one go for a year.
A curious mix of the Christian and the occult, the order's beliefs were jealously guarded. Only the inner circle were allowed to know the central doctrines, that there were 33 spiritual entities or masters who were said to inhabit temples buried beneath Zurich and the Himalayas. The secrecy proved seductive.
You become disengaged and disconnected from everything that surrounds you, and there's only one key to your life's purpose or your life's objective, and that's in the solar temple. That's where it's at, that's where it's going on, and nothing else really matters. It flatters your ego to be part of a group that designs itself as an elite, that are the chosen ones. How can you not feel good about it? I actually believed that I was superior to most other people on this planet, that I had been chosen. And I would start considering other people as being less than what I was, not aware, not awake, having no idea of what life was really all about. So there was no other option for me than to stay within the group, because therefore that's where my salvation was.
The order's leaders, Joe de Mambro and Luc Jure, carefully designed such ceremonies to engender a sense of mystery, and of being in touch with the eternal. But they were very different personalities, as Delorme remembers.
People would come up to me and tell me, do you know that de Mambro is probably the most powerful reincarnated entity on the face of this planet, where it came to a point where you must not sit in his chair, you must not use Jouret's chair, the energies were too strong, because these people were so powerful. You'd look at Jouret and you could probably believe that if you wanted to, but you look at de Mambro and you're saying, him. But then on a couple of occasions you just see him in action and see that he had control on things.
From a young age, de Mambro liked to be in control.
He was a man who in his childhood had a history of violence. He told us that, in fact, growing up, he hadn't really known his father at all. He also said to us that he had developed a special, slightly odd relationship with his mother. He used to sit up with her far into the night, and they used to knit together. He had picked up what he called the rhythm of his mother, and he very soon discovered that he was gifted, above all, as a hypnotist.
In his 30s, de Mambro joined a mystic Christian organization, Amorc, and rose to become master of a French lodge. Then, in the best Templar tradition, he went to Jerusalem, where he claimed he would conceive a child who would be a prophet.
He spoke a lot about Israel. He said he had been close to important people in Israel, including the head of the Israeli Secret Services, and that he had stayed with him in his house. He had helped him in Israel. And then one day he had to flee from Israel without his passport, without anything, into Egypt to get back to Europe.
Back in Europe, de Mambro was jailed for a minor fraud in 1972. Once free, he managed to wangle a permit to live in Switzerland, where he set up a cultural foundation which would develop into the order.
I think the people who claim that de Mambro was a con man are right. I think that the people who claim that de Mambro was convinced about his spiritual message are right too. De Mambro was just a kind of complex personality, actually a kind of schizophrenic and disturbed personality. The terrible consequence of it is that he is a total loss of reality, and the dream world he elaborated was shared with several people who more and more entered into his delusions.
Thierry was one of many followers who lived in small communities established and run by the order. De Mambro controlled every aspect of their lives.
He'd say to us, for example, that our love for someone had now run its course on earth, and if we didn't accept that, wait and see the troubles we'd have in our afterlives. So everything about our lives, the food we ate, our experiences in the crypts, the smallest things were controlled. So we lived with a sword constantly above our heads. But he was very clever. He said, "You don't have to listen to me. I'm just a signpost. I'm just telling you the way. You can go which way you want, but then don't come to me afterwards and complain." As he was constantly showing us what a master he was in the crypts, in everything, we were completely taken over by his personality. It was like a child who loves his father. His father's everything. He'll believe what his father says is right. He was our father, and there were 50 children.
The other leader, Luc Jouret, had a very different background. A homeopathic doctor, he was well known on the New Age circuit in Canada. He preached a conventional ecological message, advocated a macrobiotic diet, and gave seminars on motivation. Jean-Francois Meyer met him in 1987. Their discussions were surprisingly open.
He spoke to me about some problems he had in his personal life, especially the premature death of a child, which obviously affected him quite a lot. Jouret really was quite convinced that he had a mission to fulfill, that he was like a kind of representative of the Templar order into the profane world. But he confided me some details which actually, if they would have been made public at the time, could have created some trouble for him. For instance, he told me, telling me to keep it as being confidential, that it had been ordained a priest by a wandering bishop, and that he was officiating as a priest inside the group, inside the Templar order. Of course, nobody outside of the group knew that.
I would have become involved with just about anything to stay with Dr. Jouret. And I felt that if I was able to get closer to him, or at least to stay within the group, that at some point I would probably gain more knowledge. I would probably have access to revelations, to wonderful things. And even maybe at one point to be in contact with either entities or extraterrestrials or whatever. That's the impression that I got.
And you wanted that?
Oh yes, I wanted that.
Only the elite, who had passed all the initiations from novice to knight, were treated to the secrets of the inner sanctum. Here they were privy to startling revelations. Not only messages from their mysterious spiritual masters, but sometimes apparitions of the figures themselves. Legends seemed to come to life. Objects of tremendous spiritual significance mysteriously materialized. Proof, claimed de Mambro, of how blessed they all were.
He would say to us, "Do you realize that we are the only people on the planet to be seeing these things? That throughout history there have been great souls, great saints, and they have never had a sign. And we have flashes, signs. We have the blood of Christ. We have masters who materialize in front of our very eyes, and Excalibur, and we have the menorah, the seven-branched candelabra which belonged in the Ark of the Covenant. One day, the Holy Grail, the very Holy Grail the Knights of the Round Table had sought after, appeared in the Ark of the Covenant. It had a shining quality.
Didn't you have any doubts?
No, we fell to our knees with more than joy to see the Holy Grail.
While de Mambro was mesmerizing his followers, he himself was increasingly worried. He became convinced the order was under surveillance.
He was convinced that we as a group were being listened to. He didn't want anyone to understand what we said to each other on the phone.
And did he give you the slightest impression who might be doing that?
Politicians, men of the state. I soon understood that this was a man who was afraid.
It was hardly surprising. De Mambro had been involved with many questionable characters. One particular unsavory connection was Julien Origas, who lived here in the Château d'Auty in southwest France.
What we can tell with certainty is that there was a connection with the renovated order of the Temple of Julien Origas, and Origas obviously had some interaction with some people on the right.
On the far right.
On the far right, yes, on the far right, okay.
A Gestapo agent during the war, Origas had strong links with Mussolini and Italian fascists. The French detective Roger Facon found that after the war, when many collaborators were shot, Origas was allowed to slip back to France, and set up a new Templar order.
When Origas started his Neo-Templar order, well, there's this Templar vocation since his order was claiming a Templar heritage. So there's this Neo-Templar structure, there's this Neo-Templar language, there are these Neo-Templar teachings. But that's really just playing to the gallery. At the same time, there was a much more, shall we say, pragmatic purpose behind it all. And that was to report on the activity of the extreme French right in 1970, 1972, 1976. And that's when the far right was being rebuilt in France.
De Mambro knew he could make good use of Origas' right-wing connections. By 1981, Origas was an old man, and de Mambro had persuaded him it was time to hand over the position of Grand Master to Luc Jouret. As with everything in the order, it required secrecy and ceremony, as Thierry remembers.
Then we had a very important ceremony. The ceremony of the passing of the torch from the old master who is dying to the new one.
De Mambro now had access to Origas' extensive right-wing connections, but he may have bitten off more than he could chew. The letter to the French minister Pasqua mentions many members were not true Templars, but racists and terrorists organized by police special forces. Did some of these become enemies of the new leaders?
I was told on a number of occasions that de Mambro was so important a planetary presence that many people wanted to eliminate him.
Yet none of this background was mentioned in the official police investigation. In April 1996, the Swiss investigators held a press conference. Their chief investigator, André Piller, argued most of the dead were deluded and willing to die, and that de Mambro and Jouret had become paranoid for no good reason.
Our inquiry has found that the authors of this showed determination and the will to achieve their goal and designs. One can even say that they were obsessed by it. This was not a simple happening, but an apocalypse, the plan for which had been developed over a very long time.
But our own investigations reveal a very different picture. There's little evidence to suggest the order was planning to annihilate itself. Quite the opposite. In Canada by the late 1980s, the order was expanding, buying several properties near Montreal. It acquired this farm at Sainte-Anne-de-la-Parade, where it developed a new age community, heavily into organic farming. They even planned a nuclear shelter, hardly the act of an organization about to wipe itself out. But the order was increasingly concerned about official surveillance, and with good cause. It started late in 1992, when one of the Canadian leaders, Jean-Pierre Vinet, asked Herman Delorme to lend him a gun to go hunting.
At one point he said, "It is possible that you won't see it again." I said, "Fine, no problem." Can you imagine being so stupid? Anyhow, I gave him the gun, and 2 weeks later he comes back to me during another conference, and he says, "Well," he says, "what you brought to me was fine, but not exactly what I needed." He says, what I'm looking for is more in the way of something that is silent." He says, "Could you find something that has a silencer?" So I started asking around, and the first people I asked to were friends of mine, and one of those friends was a police officer, and he thought I was crazy. And sooner or later, I latched on to somebody that, without my knowledge, was a police informant. So as soon as I told him that I was looking for a gun with a silencer, he rang up, probably rang up the SQ headquarters and said, "Hey, I got this guy here that's looking for a gun with a silencer."
The Sûreté Québécoise, the Quebec police, convinced themselves Herman was setting up a terrorist cell. An informant was instructed to trap Herman by offering him an arsenal of weapons. The police also started to tap Herman's phone. This led them back to Jean-Pierre Vinet, who by coincidence happened to have an office in the same building as the Prime Minister of Quebec. That was enough for the police. They saw a major terrorist threat. In a classic sting, Delorme was sold the gun by the informant, allowed to take it away, and then arrested as he tried to deliver it to Vinet.
So I saw this car blocking my way. Automatically, I just stepped on the brake, put it in reverse, but at the same time, another car comes up behind me and blocks my way. And then there's this van that comes up on the side, about 10 feet from my car. The two doors open, and there's those two guys there that are yelling like banshees. And I've got machine guns or assault weapons pointed at me, and I just saw myself die.
In fact, Delorme and Vinet were just fined $1,000 each for buying arms illegally. But when the Canadian press got hold of the tapes of the police taps, they found the authorities in Europe were already watching the order. One journalist who heard the tapes works for Quebec's largest paper, La Presse.
At a certain moment on the tapes, and this is in the hours before a warrant for his arrest was issued here, Jaurès is complaining to Vinet or his wife that he had been arrested, that he was treated like a brigand. And he's outraged by that, he says. Now I tried to find out from the police who had arrested him and where, but it wasn't possible to do so. If we knew that, we would know the extent to which the group was being watched and suspected in Europe.
The most likely scenario is that the Quebec police asked their counterparts in France and Switzerland to help. Martin Pelchat tried hard to follow the international trail.
There was a warrant for the arrest of Jaurès put out through Interpol. Now, after he was found guilty here, did the police forces continue to keep the group under surveillance? That seems very probable to me.
This might explain de Mambro's paranoia. It wasn't helped when in 1993 he and his wife were in Canada and applied to the French embassy for new French passports. It should have been a standard request, but it was referred back to Paris.
As a lawyer in Quebec, wrote to Jocelyne de Mambro in order to tell her, well, you should take that problem quite seriously. This is going to a higher level. Obviously, he had got wind that the French authorities had become a little bit suspicious. And so, through writing a letter like that, obviously, it confirmed the worst fears of the group.
There were serious problems by early 1993. The order was suffering from internal squabbles. De Mambro was quizzed on what he had done with the large sums of money donated by members. But far more significant, the order's doctrines were being questioned. Thierry and some others discovered the apparitions of spiritual masters were just clever illusions created by lighting tricks and holograms.
Tout ce que j'avais perçu pendant des années, mais que j'avais
everything that I had wondered about for years, but suppressed saying, I didn't want to believe it. And when I found out it was all false, it all came back up like a bubble to the surface of water. I wanted to kill myself. I really did want to kill myself. I just couldn't bear it anymore.
De Mambro's reaction was characteristically ingenious. To keep the rebels on board, he revealed that they were in fact reincarnations of great saints.
He put me back in a context that in many ways I didn't want to leave. I had worked 14 years in the group, believing in everything I was told. Now I discovered it was all false. But then Joe made me live through extraordinary experiences. Now I was told I was the vehicle for another reincarnation, that I was Saint Bernard of Clairvaux.
De Mambro also resorted to blackmail.
Le cas de Monsieur Pillet.
The case of Mr. Pillet. They compromised him completely, and when he refused to stump up any more money, they threatened him with revealing that he had had relations, sexual relations with Jaurès. Yes.
Under pressure from all sides, Di Mambro fought back.
Di Mambro was dealing constantly with human problems, which is not surprising when you're running an organization like a dictator or like a Führer, when you're splitting couples up and creating others. You can hardly expect to have a quiet life. Di Mambro was a guy who was used to difficulties. He lived in the midst of them. So, all of a sudden, he's going to kill himself when faced with a problem? I'd say it's the opposite. Rather, he'd find a terrible energy to fight back. If there's a logic to apply in this case, it's certainly not that of giving up.
The pressure on Di Mambro was now coming from many directions. In January 94, 10 months before the deaths, and then again in July, Facon was offered a commission. He is still unwilling to say by whom.
Yes, they asked me to write a book which would expose the order's leaders, Di Mambro and Jaurès.
And was it just the two of them, or were there other figures involved?
Yeah, the leaders and also some others. Others who seemed to annoy them, who had risen in the ranks of the Solar Temple. And I have to say, in particular, that's when I first got to hear of a certain Lardanchet.
Lardanchet was one of the 2 French police officers seen near the chalets just after the first deaths. Both were found dead in the Vercors. No one knows whether they were true mystics or working undercover. After the first killings, both were interrogated and released. They were allowed to keep their service revolvers. It now turns out that these guns were used to kill some of the 16 in the Vercors itself. By 1994, the order was riven with splits and tensions. The leaders were under suspicion. Some members knew the apparitions were bogus, and others were trying to get their money back from Di Mambro.
One day I really had enough. He threatened me on the phone. The order was really beginning to crumble. The fact that I left was a bombshell. People knew my sincerity. And they knew I'd given everything of myself for 14 years. And it started to seem very suspicious. People asked why I had left. I didn't say anything.
Despite the defections, Di Mambro didn't give up. In September 94, a week before the first deaths, 125 members were summoned to a meeting at Avignon in France. Di Mambro told them the order would change its structure, and from now on, everyone would report directly to him. We've tracked down one man who was present.
That's why the whole thing doesn't make sense. Well, it doesn't make sense. You might be hiding something.
But did anything you heard, this was the 24th of September?
Yeah, a week before.
Nothing that you heard suggested to you that the order was facing a major drama?
No, on the contrary. Rather, it was a logical evolution, a new start.
Rosemary Jaton found no sign her relatives were preparing to die. Her brother, her sister-in-law, and their teenage children all had plans for the immediate future.
What makes us think of murder is that he had plans. He had obtained his provisional driving license, and in September he planned to take his driving test. And he even had a date for it fixed for later in October. None of that suggests that he meant to die.
Others are convinced there was a conspiracy to destroy the order. In Quebec City, the treasurer of the order alleged to us that he and another member had received written, anonymous death threats days before the massacre. Roger Guiger refused to speak on camera, but claimed he had given the Quebec police the threatening notes. The police consistently refused to give us an interview, claiming the investigation is officially closed. Guiger is not the only one to wonder whether the deaths might not have been engineered from the outside.
Have we been told the whole truth? I'm sorry to say, but we still don't know whether the deaths were internal or involve some external agency, and that's why we feel intimidated and we're still afraid.
My big fear is that people developing such conspiracy theories are actually just playing the game of Jody Mambro without knowing it. They are playing his game through creating a myth.
But can survivors imagine being so manipulated as to commit suicide?
Killed myself? No. At least, God, I hope not. I asked the question to a friend of mine who knew Juret and Di Mambro for 15 years. Is it possible that I could actually have committed suicide? And that person answered, Herman, try to remember what your attitude and your mental dispositions were early 1993. Keep pushing it for another 6 months. And then put yourself in a situation at a certain time, a certain place, where through meditations, through rituals, you are continually engrossed in that and kept going forward and forward and forward. She says, it could have happened. And it might have. It might have, but I don't believe that. That I could actually. Now, what scares me, and probably worse than anything, is when I realize that maybe I could have pulled the trigger, but not on myself. That scares me.
The history of cults is littered with mass suicides, but there has never been such a series of deaths. 4 separate incidents over a period of 15 months.
How can we now explain what happened in Vercors? I had personally spoken in the days after the events of October 94 with 2 of the people who died in Vercors. And with both of them, I had got the same feeling. They were still quite firm in their beliefs, but they were under deep shock about the way it had happened. None of them could give any explanation to himself or herself, and still less to the policeman, about why a gun was used and so on. They were just able to tell us this is really horrible, and one of the 2 ones I was able to speak with told me, no, for me, no, it's finished, things the way it has happened, I cannot go on, that's not possible.
If we are to believe the official account, a group of middle-aged civil servants and businessmen and women organized 3 separate collective suicides on 2 continents within 24 hours of each other. And barely a year later, another 16 members, including 2 French policemen, also killed themselves in bizarre circumstances. All the authorities are desperately keen for us to believe this version, but the police investigation was undoubtedly flawed. They claim the leaders of the order were under such great pressure that they decided to kill themselves. But no one can point to one cause or event just before October the 4th, 1994, that could possibly have provoked the tragedy. 2 years later, there are as many unanswered questions surrounding the investigation as around the original events themselves. What really happened to the Solar Temple may always remain a mystery. Did 69 people take their own lives? Or is there a more sinister story still to be told?
It's very hard to live with. Sometimes I'm the prisoner of my dreams. And it's as if I'm jinxed. It's hard to get over.
I've asked myself many questions. I have read the material, which even suggested links with the mafia and with P2. Now, if there really is some big secret here, which the government feels it's important not to reveal, at least they should tell us that. We can't keep asking ourselves questions forever. We, the families, need to be able to grieve, to do our mourning, and to get on with our lives. That's why we have to know exactly what happened.
Il faut qu'on sache exactement ce qui s'est passé.